Good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to Women's in African Power Increasing Connection series. My name is Ana Rojas, and it is my pleasure to be your moderators for today's session and to welcome you to our first webinar for 2019. We are very excited because we have some great powerhouse women on our panel today, and we want to thank them and you for tuning in and listening to today's topic, which is negotiating with impact in the energy sector. As you know, Women in African Power and its Increasing Connection webinar series are made possible thanks to the support of Power Africa, which is a U.S. government-led partnership coordinated by USAID. Before we get started on this conversation of today, I want to run you through some virtual housekeeping matters, so please stay tuned. As you may have noticed, you are on mute mode, and this will continue throughout the webinar to avoid disturbances, so that we can listen better to the presenters. However, this doesn't mean that you're forbidden from interacting with us. Quite the opposite. If you look at the box that's on the right side of your screen, you will see that there is a chat function, which you can use to share your questions and comments with us. So please do communicate throughout the whole of the webinar with us. My colleague Maria Preble, who's behind the scenes, will be supporting us with all technical related issues, and she's also going to be compiling your questions and comments so that we can present them to the panelists towards the end of our conversation. Maria is also going to make some handouts available to you as we speak, and as it's also become customary with the series, we will be sharing a set of additional resources with you once the recording of this webinar is available. So you will receive later on an email with the link to the recording, as well as to some resources and exercises that you can do to practice how to best negotiate in the energy sector. And I would like to then just briefly, for those of you who may not know about the Women in African Power Network, just to let you know that you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and that if you're not a member, you can always reach out to Denise Mortimer, whose emails you're seeing here on the screen, to join. And why should you just join? Because Women in African Power is a network that convenes and connects established and emerging female leaders working in the African energy sector. In very short time, we're reaching now more than 700 members in more than 20 African countries. And this means that we have not only large amount of numbers in terms of membership, but also diversity in terms of the background of the work, because we have members working at utilities, with energy finance, at NGO level. We have engineers, very senior members, but also even students, junior professionals who are at the university level and want to increase their knowledge of the energy sector. The Increasing Connection webinar series aims at sharing knowledge and building the professional skills of women active in the African energy sector. This is the reason why today we will be learning more about how to negotiate with impact in the energy sector as part of those webinars aimed at supporting career development of women in the sector. And we're very pleased to have today, as I said, two marvelous women with us. Our first speaker is Adako Ufere Awanor, who's an energy attorney and founder of DAX Consult. She's a Ghanaian citizen. And we also have Juliana Kainga, who's the Senior Business Development Manager at Enel Green Power, and Juliana is from Kenya. So we would have not only two different experiences, but also two different flavors in terms of geography of the conversation of today. Once we've heard from their life experiences and we've had what you have gotten to know now as a format of interviews with the panelists, we will go into a section of questions and answers where we will expect to have your inputs and comments. And before we get started into our conversation, we would like to just take a couple of moments to reflect on what a negotiation is. Because yes, we are very used to having two or maybe more parties who need to come to a decision, but have different preferences. And that's why they come together and they negotiate. We will pay particular attention today to two elements that are quite important in the energy sector. One of them being negotiations in procurement processes, where these negotiations apply to supplying goods and services, but also to the sales process, where, of course, these negotiations there are take place in the realm of selling products. Of course, this could also be projects or ideas. And as you can see, there is some additional information in a handout that is being shared with you. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker to the floor, or to the microphone in this case. And I would like to then give the opportunity to Ms. Awako Uferere Aunor to share her experiences and ideas with us.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hi, we can hear. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
But we still can. Yes, now we can see your screen. The floor is yours.
Great. So with this presentation, I'm just going to give a short bio about myself, my career journey, the work I've done, and just basically my experience in the energy sector. So my name is Ajaku Uferere with in-depth cross-border African experience across the fields of oil and gas, power, mining, energy policy, and gender. I'm also a gender equality and women's rights activist, and I'm particularly committed to working towards finding solutions that address and lead of energy poverty experienced by women in rural and low-income urban areas. Currently, I'm the founder and CEO of DAX Consult, which is a consulting firm that provides legal and business advisory services in Africa. So my career journey has been mostly strictly in the legal space. I started out in 2009 as an associate attorney in Martins, Agbo, and Shegun. During that year, Diezani was appointed as the first ever female in Nigeria. Seeing a woman in that position really inspired me, so I caught the oil and gas bug, and I left to go get a master's in oil and gas law at the University of Aberdeen. After my master's, I got a job as legal counsel at GE Oil and Gas, which is the oil and gas servicing business of the General Electric Company. I was at GE for about 3 years, and in 2016, I moved to Equatorial Guinea as a senior associate at a firm called Centurion Law Group, which had offices in about 6 African countries. So I'd always primarily worked in Nigeria, but I really wanted to work across the continent, and this gave me the opportunity to practice cross-border jurisdictional oil and gas law. After 5 months at Centurion, I was made head of the energy practice in August 2016, a position I held until I resigned in August 2018. So I left Centurion to focus on building my own practice and also to expand my skill set in the power sector, specifically energy and gender. However, there are not many opportunities to gain experience in that sector. So I had to self-educate. I did a lot of online courses, webinars, read articles, and very luckily I was accepted into the Yali Women in Africa Power Leadership, which was spoken about earlier on. The Women in African Power organized a residency, and Getting into that program gave me the launch pad I'd been looking for to formally get into the sector via opportunities, trainings, and experience. So if you're not a member, you should really join Women in African Power. If you're in the energy sector, it's awesome for your development. So currently, I'm the CEO of a firm called Dax Consult, like I mentioned earlier. We provide legal and business advisory services on transactions for international and indigenous energy and infrastructure companies and to governments. I also provide gender mainstreaming services. I facilitate the entry of international companies into Africa. I also handle digital communication and social media strategy for companies. Finally, I lead employee performance improvement training for companies and governments. My academic experience has been, I have a bachelor's in law from the University of Nigeria. I have a certificate in law from the Nigerian Law School, a master's in oil and gas law from the University of Aberdeen. I have a certification in public management from the University of California, Davis. I have a certification in energy leadership from the University of South Africa Graduate School of Business Leadership. And I have a certification in gender and sexuality from the University of British Columbia. I've also been very lucky to have had many achievements in my career and be recognized in my sector. So I have been named as one of the 40 under 40 leading lawyers in Nigeria in 2016. I won the Attorney of the Year at African Legal Awards in 2017. I was named Young African Professional of the Year by an independent Pan-African Youth Parliament in 2018. I was named a Mandela Washington Fellow in 2018. I'm an honorary fellow of the Institute for Energy Security in Ghana. And I was also named to the WiNiger Power list as one of the 10 most influential Nigerians in the corporate world in 2018. I'm also actively involved in charity as the head of legal for Stand to End Rape initiative. This is a nonprofit that provides legal, financial, and rehabilitation services to victims of gender-based violence. I'm also a member of International Lawyers for Africa Ghana National Committee. ILFA provides secondment opportunities in international law firms for African lawyers. And I'm an accredited mentor with the Women in International Affairs Network, which is a mentoring organization for women. So that is a really short bio. If you want to find out more about me, my personal website is www.adakuufereawono.com. My company website is www.daxconsult.com, and you can reach out to me at adaku@daxconsult.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Adaku. I think it's been amazing, actually, to listen to you. And I'm glad that our participants know now that I was not lying when I was saying that we had seriously powerful, energetic, and amazing women today as panelists. And we would be very much looking forward about your reflections on negotiating skills. And I also needed to thank you for that great advertisement about the network. And it's always a pleasure to know that Women in African Power is able to provide useful services to its members. So we thank you really for that acknowledgement.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. And then on that note, I want to invite now Juliana Kainga to join us and to introduce herself first to the audience before we start talking about negotiating in the energy sector.
Thanks a lot, Anna, and great presentation, Adaku. It's very interesting to know that we actually had a similar background in terms of GE oil and gas experience. So my name is Juliana Kimberly Kainga. I don't know if can you see my screen? Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Just give me a minute. I just need to. Yeah. So I'm Juliana Kimberly Kainga. I have worked in the energy sector this is going to be the 8th year now. I started with the renewable energy markets and moved into oil and gas, and a chunk of my time has actually been in the oil and gas industry. And it's sort of come back full circle, and I'm back in the renewables market covering the Eastern African sub-region. So I have, as seen on the the presentation, I have had experiences with in sales and business development roles in oil and gas and renewable energy, mostly in East and Southern Africa. I've also had experience working in the US in the oil and gas side, and in Italy in oil and gas on the manufacturing side of things. So most of my experience has been in sales, and I'll be speaking from that perspective when it comes to negotiation, and with some of my experiences that I have and some of the ideas that I think are necessary to actually take into account when it comes to negotiations. The thing I love about energy is the impact that it has on people's lives, on businesses, on countries, because we're not just trying, we're not doing anything ordinary. It's something that it takes time. We're trying to solve a very big problem, especially in the continent, and we're just trying to make lives a bit better. So this is something that really excites me about the sector and the work that we do. When it comes to negotiations, I have a sort of primary rule when it comes to that, and you can see that on the page. Most people can see it as more of like it has to be a game, or we're going in, it's like a war, a fight. And I'm sure most of you are already working in the energy space. So, you know, it's actually quite small, and you'll run into your customers, your suppliers, your subcontractors multiple times in your career. And it's a very, very niche sort of environment. And your reputation and credibility are really key. And essentially, the people you interact with will inevitably be your best salespeople. So this is my thinking when you think about negotiation, and even just your career and your brand as a whole. So when we were asked to talk about negotiations by Anna and Maria, I thought it would be very important to look at sort of ground ourselves and remember certain things about energy, especially in Africa. So energy in Africa, definitely it's a developing market. There are huge opportunities for growth. Energy is a key enabler for these to fill the infrastructure gap. As mentioned by Africa Development Bank, there's actually 170 billion infrastructure gap in the region. And Africa has the lowest number of projects that are actually deployed compared to other regions. So there's definitely a huge opportunity there. The energy sector is also very complex in Africa from a technology standpoint. It's a very niche market. There's a lot of customization that has to be done logistically, because most of these projects are in remote areas, and not too many customers or suppliers have worked in most of these places. So it ends up being even a tougher challenge to overcome when you're dealing with deals in Africa, in energy in particular. It goes without saying political risk is there. Just to give an example, in Kenya, we had our elections in 2017. We're sort of going through the ripple effects of that and the delays in decision making and so on and so forth. And this is something that's not unique to East Africa, it's just generally an African challenge. And energy deals can actually be impacted by this. And there are also a lot of financing and currency risks, especially on bankability of projects and whether you actually have real projects in your pipeline versus those that will actualize in the near term. It's also good to note that most of these projects are so long cycle. Just to give you an example, I started working in the energy sector in 2011. I started with a wind project here in Kenya, and it's only until this year in 2019 that the project has come to fruition. So that has been 8 years of a project that's been in development. I'm actually so glad that it's completed, because I can now put that and actually name it on my CV. But it's just a true testament of showing what actually happens in the energy sector in Africa, that there's so many delays, there are a lot of decisions that need to be made compared to other regions. The other thing is a very huge pool of stakeholders. It's nothing unique, but it's a bit more intense in the region, especially when it comes to community issues. A lot of these infrastructure projects are in very remote areas that impact a lot of communities in the region that have already been impacted previously from maybe being shunned away from development opportunities and all that. So other than dealing with government and lenders and academia and any interested stakeholders, there are also certain other stakeholders that you have to take into account. And last but not least, most of these projects are government dependent because most are actually government financed. And if for some reason the priority shifts, if for example, with change of administration, or maybe there's just a focus in a different sector, this can actually affect the energy deals that we would work on. I've actually experienced this myself. So I don't know if any of you know about VUCA environment. This is something that I learned a few years ago, and it's very prevalent right now, that the environment that we're experiencing with the changing technology, everything is moving so fast, and it basically stands for a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. And I think there's nothing more true than the energy sector in Africa, especially. So we have to navigate so much in this sector, in the region, with all these complexity and all these uncertainties. So Anna, I'm not sure I'm not sure if I should go now directly to the negotiation part of it, but I can stop there if you like, and we can move on to more of the intricacies of maybe some of our experiences.
Okay, thank you, Juliana. Yes, we can leave it like this, unless there's something else about you as a person that you want to share with the audience before I start with the interview part.
No, we can go ahead, no problem.
Great, thanks. So again, very interesting to listen to you, and also thank you for providing us with this introduction also to the sales aspects of the sector. And Maria, I'm not sure people can see my screen. Yes, thank you. There you go. This is a slide I wanted to share with you. So, like I said, we would like to now engage into this more of an interview format part of the webinar. And Adaku, I wanted to start with you. And before, you know, the questions that I had already prepared, I was wondering if you wanted to reflect a little bit more about the procurement angle from the energy sector in Africa, and how you approach negotiations within, you know, this very specific way of working, which is engaging in procurement processes.
Right. So my procurement experience, obviously as a lawyer, my procurement experience is not as extensive, but having to work with the sales and procurement team from time to time. In Africa, because I have worked all over sub-Saharan Africa, I have closed transactions in about 27 African countries. So this is just SSA, not North Africa. And I think the running thread usually is our issues with taxing. Now, when we're negotiating the contract and we're negotiating for the products, the equipment they were supposed to bring into these countries, there's always the tax issue, whether there'll be import taxes or not. And my experience in South Sudan, I think in Equatorial Guinea, in Mozambique, we're usually able to get that waived, but Nigeria is very strict about import taxes. So you kind of have to know what region you're working with and what country you're working in to see how much you can get away with, so to speak. And obviously, like Juliana said, you're not going in, it's not a battle, it's not a fight. You're trying to make sure it's a win-win situation for everybody. So what I've noticed mostly with our biggest problem with procurement is always import taxes. That's my biggest problem. But East and Southern Africa are very amenable to either reducing it greatly or placing kind of like a limit on how much, maybe how the percentage of goods you can bring in and how much taxes they will levy on it. But West Africa is very, very strict about levying import taxes.
Okay, thank you. And then based on your experience, what would you say are the key differences in negotiations? Sorry, my tongue is struggling today. What may be the biggest differences when you're negotiating in the energy sector versus, or when compared to other sectors? Do you have some thoughts on that?
So I worked in maritime, fast-moving consumer goods, entertainment, fashion, and the underlying difference, I think the major difference is that the energy sector is obviously far more male-dominated. So the negotiation strategy sometimes is how many men can we fit into a room to intimidate the other side? Honestly, like you have a simple negotiation and they're flying in 14 men and only one speaks, and you know it's not necessary, right? So most men and women have very different negotiation strategies, which obviously stem from socialization. And I've noticed in the energy sector, negotiations tend to be as grandiose as possible. So they fly lawyers off to exotic locations. We take constant breaks. Sometimes negotiations can stretch for a year. I've been in a negotiation about a couple years ago. We're in Singapore and we reached deadlock like 3 days in. And then everybody's like, you know what, let's go off to Geneva and take some time off. And I'm like, why? Why are we going to Geneva? Let's finish this here. But honestly, I was outvoted. And it's kind of like, it's more of how many grand gestures can we make? So people make unsubstantiated claims as to the amount of money one side has, which after investigation can be found to be, you know, an exaggeration. So everything in the energy sector is always done on such a large scale. So it takes time to sift through the noise to the meat of the matter. It's also very, very cutthroat because obviously the amount of money involved.
I find this fascinating. But I want to give the opportunity to Juliana to also share with us her experience, because Juliana, although you also, I mean, you work in the energy sector, so I wonder if you recognize what Adaku is saying, but also I would love to hear your reflections on how sales and negotiations in the energy sector may be different from other sectors.
Yeah, definitely what Adaku has mentioned is very true. And it's not only in negotiations, it can just even be just a general introductory meeting or, yeah, so this is something that's very real in the energy sector. I think for me, the biggest difference I've seen is definitely the timelines and the complexity when it comes to energy projects. Because you have a project, like let's say the example I gave earlier, you have a project that runs for around 8 years. Maybe you've signed a contract in the second year and you have to have contracts that transcend that time period. You'll have many revisions, you'll have amendments. Needs and goals will change throughout that 8-year period. So it even makes it more challenging because of the timelines of an energy project. And God forbid, at least a project might not be abandoned, because this is also a very real thing with energy projects. Some projects are actually abandoned after doing all that work. So it's very different from a fast-moving consumer goods type of market. And also in that respect, there are a lot less revolving doors, in that you will have this sort of the same people dealing with the projects for a long period of time, as opposed to the FMCG sector, where you only deal with one person for one quarter and then you'll find there's someone else for the next quarter and all that. So relationships are very key in the energy sector, and your networks are also very, very important. So those are the key differences that I've seen.
Interesting. And Juliana, while I have you now here, I do have another question, and I hope our audience is also thinking about questions to pose to you and to Adaku while they listen to us. I want to ask you about the goals. When you're engaging in negotiations, what are you trying to achieve, and what's the criteria that you use to rank success when you're negotiating?
So coming from a sales background, the primary goal is to make the sale. At the end of the day, you want to meet the sales target, you want to book that order, you want to book that deal. But at the end of the day, because you want to be very, I'd say, consultative, a little less transactional with the deals, you essentially want to win the other party over, because most of these transactions, most of these deals would only happen once. You're trying to rope in your customer for a long period of time. So whatever you're negotiating today will actually influence your sales or potential order pipeline going forward. So your goal should be having the customer on your corner even after negotiations. Primary goal, yes, close the deal, but essentially to maintain that relationship and have them on your corner. So the next time they have to buy a product or buy a service, you're the first person they think of.
So long-term thinking and relationship building seems to be coming very strong from your point of view. Adaku, I want to pose the same question to you in terms of the goals that you're trying to achieve and when you are negotiating and how you assess the success of your negotiations.
Okay, so my primary purpose is usually to achieve the best possible outcome for my client and the transaction. So profit is of course the end goal, but you need to learn to expand your definition of profit beyond financial terms and look at other ways in which the transaction can be beneficial to your client. I also try to learn as much as I can about the team in order to figure out their zone of uncertainty. So there's this famous negotiator, George Ross. He defines this as the balance between the minimum the other side of the table will accept and the maximum that you're willing to give. So if I can figure out this zone of uncertainty, then I can pinpoint their bottom line, which is the point that once they go past, the deal is no longer worthwhile to them. So that tells me how far I can push. Now, the criteria I would use to evaluate negotiation success is, like I said before, achieving as much of a win-win situation as I can for both sides. I need to make sure the final deal is mutually beneficial and goes a long way in building a strong partnership, as opposed to when the other party thinks the outcome is heavily one-sided. Another criteria is that I need to make sure all issues in the dispute were settled, or at least the number of unresolved issues were reduced. Then next one is that the underlying core conflict was resolved, and also that the parties learned to communicate better with each other, and the distance between the parties' position was narrowed. So for a personal example, like I mentioned, I negotiated the first ever exploration and production sharing agreement in South Sudan in 2017. At the time, my client was Africa's largest indigenous exploration company, and we're looking to sink South Sudan's first independently negotiated oil well as a sovereign nation. So it was important that I got the best possible deal for my South Sudan was still a very young country. I think they're the youngest country in the world as of now, and their development was crucial. So it couldn't be a case where I just came in and took all their resources without ensuring the country grows and profits. So while we were negotiating, we discovered South Sudan did not have a local content law. I don't know how many people are lawyers here or work in the oil and gas industry, but local content is crucial for African countries and their development in exploration. So I could have taken advantage of the fact that they had no local content law and flooded the country with expatriates, meaning none of the skills get transferred to the citizens. But my boss and my firm, we offered to draft a local content act for South Sudan for free. This is the people we're negotiating with. We're going to give them a whole law for free. So in coordination with officials from the Ministry of Petroleum, we facilitated several working sessions in order to achieve local content reform. And then we drafted South Sudan's first ever local content act. Our working sessions ran from, I think, November 27th, 2017 to May 2018. And in May 2018, my team presented the Ministry of Petroleum and the Petroleum Commission with the first working draft of the South Sudan National Content Bill. So I got my agreement signed with everything I needed, and I also was able to present the country with their first national content bill. So that's an example of how I got what I wanted, but I made sure it was win-win on both sides.
Thank you. And Adaku, as you know, I mean, there are some questions that I've prepared. So I'm going to ask you still, because I have you online, to be concise. As we are looking into the process of negotiations, I want to ask you, how do you describe the different phases or steps of a negotiation? And briefly tell us how you also prepare to engage in them.
Okay, so obviously in legal it's a bit different. So I start with preparation. So this starts with determining if it is a potential collaborative situation, so I can figure out the best strategy. And I spend time researching information, analyzing data, and I leverage and identify interests and goals. Then I can determine the strategy that I want to build. From then we go to the next phase, which is exchanging information. Because by this time, obviously, I know a little about my opposition. So in exchanging information, this is where I start to engage the other side. We exchange non-disclosure agreements, all other relevant documents and contracts. And this is the point at which I can determine their trustworthiness, competency, likability, and how well our interests are aligned. because remember, we're going into a contract with each other, right? So it can't just be a one-sided issue. So this is the decision point where I decide whether to move forward. If my assessment is positive, or if it's negative, I adjust or implement my best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So after the exchange information phase, I move to negotiation. So this is where the bargaining begins. Like I mentioned earlier, primary purpose is to secure the best possible outcome for my clients. But I'm also conscious of the fact that I need both parties to achieve a mutually beneficial relationship. This means I have to figure out where and when I can make concessions in order to capture real value. Once we're done with negotiation stage, I move to conclusion. And this is where both parties are finally in agreement. At this point, we finalize all contracts, ensure the other side have the capacity to follow through, and sign all contracts. If we didn't reach an agreement in this conclusion stage, I'm careful to ensure there is no animosity, and I make sure to thank the other party for their willingness to negotiate. Now, it doesn't end there. So the final step, which is the long-term step, is execution stage, which is kind of where the lawyers fall back, and it falls to the technical or to the operations team. So this is where we start to implement the terms of the agreement. And it's usually out of my hands. However, as part of a contract administration, I'm constantly liaising with all parties on both sides to ensure the terms of the relationship are being adhered to.
Thank you. Thank you, Adaku. And we are receiving questions from the audience. So just as a reminder, if you do send them, also mention if you have one of our panelists in mind for a particular question, or if it's for both. Juliana, I want to pose the same question I just asked Adaku in terms of the steps that you see in a negotiation process, and perhaps most importantly, how you prepare for them.
Yeah, so I'd also break them down into two parts. That's preparation and what I do during the negotiations, and then even the more critical is post-negotiation exercises or activities that you might need to do. So on the preparation side, it's very important to know the customer and know the customer goals and needs, and then even to some extent know your customer's customer needs. So when you go beyond just your customer, then you're able to solve the pain points that they are trying to solve as well. So, and then you're able to have a bit more information on what they are trying to achieve at the end of the negotiation, or what are some of their priorities in their organization that this negotiation would actually help them achieve. Other things would be, looking at terms and history of the proposed contracts. Maybe this is not the first time you're interacting with the customer. What has happened before? What can we bring to the table today that happened yesterday? Also knowing your authority to negotiate and your bargaining power. I've worked for very large companies, and most of the time we do have that bargaining power, but there's always value that each person is bringing to the table, and we also have to understand what are those push and pull things that we need to activate during the negotiation. Also, very basic, deciding which team members will actually join you into the negotiation table, whether it's the finance person, the procurement person, people are actually key decision makers, if it's possible to have them there. And then obviously knowing who's coming from the other side is very important in the preparation stage. During negotiations, just being very aware of any particular gains or concessions that are being made, not personalizing or focusing on issues, and definitely just moving forward as reasonably as you can. Looking at timing, be very clear on deadlines, because that can actually make people make quicker decisions and not let issues linger during the negotiations. And then you should also, unfortunately, also be prepared to walk away from a deal if it actually just looks like a bad deal. And then very important, after the negotiations, stick to the key issues. When you're sending out minutes, this can be like a really double-edged sword. Be very concise with those. Definitely conduct an internal postmortem to align any action items that were agreed on during the negotiation. Be very prompt to deliver on agreed items. Also be prepared to plan a renegotiation, because most times you don't agree everything in one sitting. Be prepared for that. And then at the end, also maintain a good relationship regardless of the results.
Thank you, Juliana. And I'm just very happy that we're recording today's webinar, because I mean, I'm just afterwards, I'm just going to go through, all those lists of steps that both you and Adaku have been laying out for us, because I find it fascinating, and I do hope everyone's taking note of them. I want to jump into a question about the do's and don'ts. Do you have any do's or don'ts when you are negotiating in the energy sector? Is there something that you personally try to avoid or engaging in negotiations? Juliana?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure who that was directed to. Okay.
Sorry. Do you want me to repeat?
No, it's fine. No, I got the question. Let me start with a do. I just have one do and one do. So do make sure, as we mentioned earlier, it's a very male-dominated industry. And we're very different, and we work a bit differently, and we would negotiate differently, as mentioned. Do put your credibility on the table. Do take the first, do take up the role of leading the negotiation if you are supposed to lead the negotiation, because the minute you leave it to someone else, it might not go the way you had planned, and you might end up having 1 or 2 words or very, very little to say in the negotiation. So make sure you put your credibility on the table, put your experience out there, state your role in the negotiation if maybe this is the first time you're meeting them. Those are very, very important, especially in the industry. I'd like to echo the don'ts. Don't be competitive. It's not a game, it's not a fight. Go in with the attitude of solving a problem, taking in ideas and building on those ideas. So yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
Thank you. Adaku, the same question to you. Do you have specific do's and don'ts when you are negotiating in the energy sector? And it's something that you personally try to avoid.
Yes, because I negotiate primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, and we have very tenuous democracies. So I try to avoid long, drawn-out negotiations because the energy sector can be very bureaucratic, and due to the unstable nature of a lot of African governments, power changes can happen literally in the middle of a negotiation. And suddenly, this minister you're about to sign something is out, and you have to start from scratch and build a relationship with a new minister. This has happened to me so many times. So that's my first don't. Obviously, I'm going to make sure that I'm everything, all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. But I try to make sure if we're working directly with the government, I try to speed it up because tomorrow that minister may be gone. Then my number one do, because the energy sector is very lucrative. Many entrants, they claim to have partners, resources, and funds they don't have. They're basically faking it in hopes that they'll make it. So I make sure my due diligence is done and complete before I get into the bargaining stage. So, I mentioned the stages I mentioned: preparation, exchanging information, negotiation. Before we get into the bargaining, in the preparation and exchanging information stage, I've done all my feasibility studies. I've signed all my NDAs, my non-disclosure agreements. I've basically investigated everything but their mother's name to make sure this company can actually carry out what they say they can carry out. And also to make sure all funding is sourced and confirmed before entering into any partnerships. I don't enter into any, even in the talking stage, I don't even get to the talking stage until we've signed a non-disclosure agreement. So those are my do's and don'ts. I don't start any negotiation without doing any of these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So preparedness, I'm hearing from both of you, and also taking charge of your position. I'm going to throw in, because it fits really nicely to the conversation that I received right now for both of you, and it is as follows. And Adaku, if you want to start, that would be okay. But what about if during negotiations your team members have a different strategy for negotiations than you do?
Okay, right, because I'm usually leading my team, and before we even get to negotiations, we've plotted our strategy. So if they have a different strategy, obviously we're going to weigh, all the whatever they have, whatever I have, whatever the entire team has, and we all have to compromise and reach like a collective strategy that we're all comfortable with. And there's in the preparation stage, there's nothing really like a deadlock in the states, because when you're working with lawyers, right? So I'm usually the senior lawyer. I have maybe one other senior lawyer, then we have junior associates, and there's always it's kind of like mathematics, like 1 + 1 is equal to 2. So if you're doing upstream, midstream, downstream, LNG, there's usually a negotiation strategy that kind of works for whatever outcome you're trying to achieve. So it's very rare that we'll get into a state where nobody agrees at all, because I think Juliana mentioned it, that oil and gas industry is the same people there for 30, 40, 50 years. It's a same strategy. I think now that things are changing a bit is with the renewables industry, because extremely new, most people don't really know how to navigate that. But oil and gas power, they've been around for 50, 60, 70 years. So the strategies are usually aligned. But if there's any case where our strategies are not aligned, we cannot proceed to bargaining until we've come up with a compromise that everyone is happy with. And that is just going back and forth. And then I usually have the last say. So whatever I decide in the end is usually what goes. But obviously, I'm going to listen to everybody. I'm going to weigh everybody's strategy, and I'm going to impute into what I'm finally doing.
Okay, so maybe the question is how to acknowledge differences with the team. But then I'll go back to Juliana and ask the same question, because this was for both of you. What do you do? I mean, you're both women in very strong positions and with the possibility of making decisions. How do you deal, Juliana, with the team members that do not agree with you in these processes, or what happens when you're confronted with the situation?
Yeah, so I'm a very structured person, and very methodical. So I would be more I'd be more aligned to the strategy that shows me that we know the customer best. So there's definitely nothing wrong with having a difference in opinion, but it has to come out in a way that this is the relationship we have with the customer. This is probably what they responded to before. And also something I should mention is, before you even get on the negotiation table, you've already started the negotiation from your first sales contact point. So your first introduction. So you're already learning your customer. You're already learning what drives them. What echoes with them. So whatever strategy is aligned to what will get the best response from the customer, it could not be mine, it could actually be another team member. So we're definitely open to that. So listening to whatever they have to say, but at the end of the day, what will give us the best outcome at the end of the day? What would resonate with this particular customer?
Okay, thank you. Adaku, I'm going to go back to you. This question is specifically for you, but Juliana, maybe you want to also chip in afterwards. It comes from Vanessa Janik from the IFC infrastructure team, and her question is, when working with companies, how do you negotiate gender mainstreaming? Because there is a cost to this, and sometimes the financial returns are not immediate. You can make the case for the sake of meeting targets, following compliance standards, and so forth. But in terms of financial negotiations, how do you discuss the budgeting costs and financial gains of gender mainstreaming with teams?
Right. Thank you for that question. So luckily, we're in a state where everybody, gender is a buzzword, right? So everybody is something fashionable for a lot of people to jump on. So most companies are willing to, to have gender mainstreaming, whether they end up in that point or not, but they want people to see, this is what we're doing. Everybody has a diversity and inclusion vice president right now. So how to make the case for it it's a difficult thing to plot on metrics, because we have so many studies. Harvard, IRENA, they've all done studies to show that diverse executives or diverse management in a company makes the company more successful. But to actually show the dollar amount it's kind of abstract. So we just basically plot what's been going on. What I would usually do in my case is to show say the company is a 20-year-old company, and clearly they've probably been male-dominated for most of that 20 years. To show their profits from the time of inception to a point when they started becoming a bit more diverse, and compare that with when more women or more different, sexes, orientations, everything came into the mix. And we have shown at least 4 out of 5 times there is a distinct upscale in when they became more diverse. So I rely on what I call work precedent. So what I've done before to show, okay, from year 1980 to this year, this is how much you were making, and when you became more diverse, this is how much you have now been making, and it's always an upswing. Now, I know obviously this is not always the case because it doesn't reflect as quickly as that, but then it's we just rely on statistics, a lot of data, a lot of studies. IRENA, International Renewables Agency, is a great resource for showing examples of the advantages of gender mainstreaming, the financial implications of gender mainstreaming.
Thank you. And Juliana, I mean, from a sales point of view, it might be difficult to relate to this question, but I wonder if at any part of your conversation, you or colleagues of yours actually acknowledge the fact that there is an element of gender equality or social inclusion as part of the product or the services that you are providing.
Yes, definitely, especially when it comes to some local content requirements. There's a lot of gender diversity that's required in energy projects now that we actually have to input. And the good thing is companies are actually taking this into account, and some have been doing it for a long time. And essentially what governments are saying is, well, some governments are saying is, we have, let's say, 50% of women graduating, but we are not hiring them. So we are missing out on 50% of productivity, 50% of the workforce, and all that. So definitely policy and regulation has actually helped achieve that gender mainstreaming. But there's a lot that needs to be done, especially in the energy sector, as much as it's male dominated, but that's also a factor of, because it's a very technical industry, it just goes back all the way back to academia and how we are selling a lot of technical courses and how we are absorbing graduates from a gender perspective into the workforce. So it's definitely an ongoing conversation. I haven't had the experience of, showing the productivity numbers or going through productivity numbers. I would say I would agree with exactly they're probably higher when those are more diverse people. But it's definitely a conversation that we need to be having.
Thank you. I am conscious about the fact that we are hitting the hour mark, but also about the fact that we started a little late to give the opportunity to others to tune in. So if everyone's okay, I would like to add a couple of, let's say, 10 minutes extra, because there are 2 more questions I would really like to pose. And one is directed to the 2 of you. And I'm going to read it. So it's as true as possible to the person who's asking it. It says, I am currently a junior lawyer in a corporate law firm with a keen interest in the sector. I have just completed my master's in oil and gas, but I'm not certain how to make the switch into the sector. How can I leverage my general corporate legal exposure into this sector? What skills should I be focusing on developing? And Juliana, as I had you before on the line, perhaps we can start with you. If there are any tips, or you can think about skills of how to, move from oil and gas into other sectors.
Still in energy, or just? Sorry, I'm not very clear on the transition. Is it from oil and gas into another part of the energy sector, or?
You think you're right? Yeah.
Okay.
No, she is a junior. Yeah, let me rephrase. She is a junior lawyer in a corporate law firm, and she has an interest in the energy sector.
Mm-hmm.
And she has recently completed a master's in oil and gas.
Yeah.
So she's thinking about how to make it into the sector and start working in oil and gas.
Okay. I guess Ada could be the best person to speak on this, but I think from my side, already the legal profession is quite a transferable skill. So wherever you move or you transcend toward the energy industry, that's a very key skill set that we use. I would say something that's very universal. Work on your networks. Try to understand what's happening in the industry. What's next from the industry. Be very informed. And those types of activities or issues, just putting yourself out there. I mean, joining Women Africa Power is one of them. Putting yourself out there, meeting as many people as possible, just to also understand exactly where you want to land in the oil and gas space is very important. I think Adoko maybe would have a more precise legal answer for that.
Right. Okay.
Do you want to share?
Yes, thank you, Juliana. So, because I feel like myself and the person who asked the question actually started out the same career trajectory, because I got a master's in oil and gas law as well. Because the oil and gas industry, or the energy space is massive. So the first thing I know I did was to narrow it down. What aspect of the sector did I want to work in? I was specific about wanting to work in upstream and midstream. So first of all, you have to know where exactly you want to fit in before you start looking for experience in that sector. Then, like Juliana said, your networks are important. Find a mentor, find someone already in the industry. And I've realized a lot of people are very, amenable or welcoming to being asked, questions, especially women. So I have on LinkedIn, especially, I reach out to people who I've never spoken to ask for advice or to ask for jobs even. I got my job at GE Oil and Gas through a LinkedIn message I sent somebody. I sent her a message saying, I've just graduated, I have this experience, I'm looking for these opportunities, I'm ready to move back to Nigeria, because I was in the UK at the time. And she had a friend at GE Oil and Gas who was hiring, and she referred me, and that's how I got my first job in the oil and gas industry. So the willingness to put yourself out there, because again, there are not that many women I think globally there are about 10% of women in the energy sector. So the little that they are do tend to band together and try to help the next woman. So if you see an industry or a company that you're interested in and you can find them on LinkedIn, reach out to them. Well, in my experience, people have been very kind in that aspect. And don't be afraid of working for free. Now, I know this doesn't probably can't work for everybody. Not everybody can afford to work for free, but I did a lot of unpaid internships while I lived in Aberdeen. I did an unpaid internship with Shell and with British Petroleum, and I was able to get those companies on my resume just because I did the intern. It was a short internship. One was 2 weeks, another was 1 month, but just to say I have worked in these companies really helped. I wasn't paid, but I got a lot of experience just doing that. Do a lot of study. I do a lot of online courses, webinars such as this. I'm constantly reading articles. I'm constantly writing articles even. If I, hear there's something, especially current events, especially like with OPEC, my focus now is on what's going on with OPEC. You can read something about OPEC, offer your opinion, write a LinkedIn or Medium article about it, and you find people will Google that topic and your name comes up in a Google search that you've written on this. And that's kind of how you build a reputation as a thought leader while working or not working in the sector. Because right now your focus is on putting your name out there, showing what you can do. So that's pretty much how it has worked for me. And I think it should work for anybody if you apply it properly.
Thank you, Adaku. And I feel tempted to make a small announcement or a reminder that in one of our previous webinars, we actually discussed networking in the energy sector. So for those of you in the audience who would be interested in learning more and even trying some of the exercises that we've developed, I would like to invite you to take a look, and you'll see a link afterwards. Adaku, the last question I have is for you, but we only have very limited time. So I want to ask you to be brief. And it reads as follows. You mentioned dispute resolution as part of your negotiation plan. What type of dispute resolution method do you advise is best?
Well, usually, I think mediation. Well, obviously, it depends on the situation at hand, because if you're going into like alternative dispute resolutions or mediation, negotiation, conciliation, but they're all kind of like aspects of one thing. So going into like for a contract now, a contract dispute resolution, my strategy, like I said, is just to find a win-win strategy. And so that is, so I'd say the closest to that strategy will be mediation, to make sure both sides equally represented, both sides get what they want, both sides don't feel shortchanged at any point in time. It's difficult to maintain that balance, but honestly, that's the best thing that can happen for your transaction. Because if one side feels this person has gotten like 80% of what we're trying to do here, and I have just 20%, because remember, you have to work with these people. That's what my job is. I'm entering into contracts to work with the opposing party, so I need to make sure they're happy as well as my client is happy. So I say mediation strategy is usually the best possible outcome for me.
Thank you, Adaku. And I just realized that Maria has shared the link to the webinar that we were discussing. We are coming to a close of today's webinar. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to both Adaku and Juliana, and to be able to present also the questions from our audience. Before we say goodbye, Adaku, are there any final thoughts, a tip that you would like to leave us with?
A tip. Okay,
so yeah, a takeaway message.
I would say negotiations can be very heated, especially in oil and gas industry, especially if you're a woman. There's going to be voices that are louder than yours. There's going to be, we've had where people have walked out of rooms, people have shouted. We had a gun pulled on us once in Juba in South Sudan. So they can get very, very heated. And you just need to, especially if you're a woman, be calm, make sure your voice is heard. Like, don't cower, don't lower your voice. If you say something and nobody hears and someone else repeats it, my thing is usually to say, thank you for repeating what I just said, then I repeat it again. Just to make sure, like Juliana said, make sure they know you're doing this. Make sure they know you're handling it. Don't allow yourself to fall back into the woodwork. So have a lot of confidence. A lot of the people might not be the smartest in the room, but they are the most confident. So self-assurance and boldness goes a long way in shoring up people's assessment of you, especially for women. You need to understand nothing makes you inferior to whoever is in the room, because if you're there, you've earned your place. So project an air of confidence. Don't let anyone intimidate or talk over you. Stand your ground. Brilliant.
Stand your ground, and I would say keep calm, especially if a gun is being pulled at you. Gosh, what an experience. Yeah. Yes. Juliana, if you could help us with your takeaway message, what is the one thing you want us to remember, and from your experiences, and what we should take when negotiating in the energy sector?
Yeah, so maybe one thing that maybe we haven't mentioned yet is cultural differences. This is actually very important because, I mean, in the region we have 54 countries that we might be dealing with in energy, and just noting what are the things that you should or shouldn't do from a cultural perspective, because you're dealing maybe with a different religion, a different culture, a different tribe, and also use those things to your advantage once you actually learn what is acceptable and what is not, because also in the African context, respect is very key, and actually adhering to certain practices is also very important. So I'd say also prepare in that respect as well, and that can also take you a bit further on the table.
Thank you, Juliana. I think cultural appropriateness and respect when we are negotiating, when we're talking to each other, when we're building these relationships, that's been like the thread of your conversation and experiences, are absolutely invaluable, and I could not agree with you more. It's like I said before, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and I want to thank you both for sharing this immense richness of experiences and wisdom that you have been sharing with us today. With that, I want to thank also our audience for having joined. Before we close, just remember, negotiating is about knowing what you want and going after your goals, while also respecting your counterparts. The point of negotiation is compromise. Look out for yourself, but don't destroy future relationships. And if I can borrow from our speakers just now, I would add to that, when engaging in negotiation, own your experience, be confident, and also be sensitive to the cultural appropriateness of your audience. If you're interested in looking into past webinars from Increasing Connections, please go into the link that you're seeing here. If you're not following us on social media, do. You can find the network on Twitter, on Facebook, and LinkedIn. We are happy to hear, particularly during this webinar, that these social media outlets are useful and can continue to increase connections and job opportunities. And finally, in case you've not noticed before, you can apply for a virtual career coaching session on the topic of negotiations in the energy sector. Please do go into the link that you are finding now in the chat box of the webinar, and also the link for applying for online career coaching sessions will be in the website where you will find the recording and the additional resources that accompany this webinar. Do keep in mind that we have very limited places, so to participate, but do not be discouraged if you cannot be selected for this round. Future webinars would have similar opportunities. So with that, I want to thank you all and also thank Power Africa for making these sessions possible. We will reach out to you in a few weeks with information on new webinars and their schedules. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.